There are 1,000 stories in the Envisioner's future. This is just one of them. Well, hey, how the devil are you? Dave Copland here with another Rise of the Humans live stream. And did you see there right at the beginning, I had a sneaky look over just to see if I'd left the mute button on. But as you can appreciate, I have not done. Always good. So how's your week been? It's been a pretty amazing week, I think. There's lots going on. We've got a great show for you. Before we go there, did any of you watch the SpaceX launch? We were just talking about it on the pre-roll and actually saying what a great bit of optimism it was in a world where surrounded by all of this chaos. Great to see some human achievement actually moving us forward. So always good. So this week we're all about data, and we're joined by a couple of great guests. We have with us the wonderful Nick Morris. How you doing, Nick?
Hey Dave, good to see you.
Always good to have you with us even. And also we're going to bring in a bit of an industry expert to help walk us through the world of data. We have Christian Mouysett from Tenzo. Hi Christian, how you doing?
Hi Dave, I'm doing good, thank you. How are you?
Great. So we're going to come right back to you guys in just a second. But before we do, I just wanted to get stuck into our topic today. So our topic is about data, and in particular about the relationship between data and human behavior. And one of the things that's been really fascinating to watch as we've sort of found ourselves in the midst of this pandemic is how human behavior has changed and the impact that it's had on the algorithms that we use. And so if you go back to where we started our story, at episode 1, really, we talked about, so much of what we talk about is focused on AI and what AI delivers to our society. But in reality, AI is just the engine. What's really more important to us is the fuel that powers it, and that fuel is data. And yes, there's the whole cliche about data is the new oil and all that sort of stuff, but it's true. The more data we have, the more powerful the algorithms become, because what the algorithms do with the data that we provide them with is they look for patterns. And this is an example that I use all the time on the live show, which is about showing you the power of patterns. And this is an example. It comes from the way that the human brain works, and you've seen this before many times, I'm sure. But if you speak English and if you don't speak English, it'll work in whatever is your native language. As long as I keep the first and last characters of the word in the right place, I can mix up the characters and you'll still be able to read the text. Because what's happening is your brain, just like an algorithm, is looking at this sort of ambiguity in front of it, but actually it senses patterns. It can use your past reading ability. All of the things that you've read have created a pattern that your brain can use as an algorithm to then sort of rearrange that to something that it can read. So all I'm really trying to do is to help you understand here that the algorithms we use every day on a daily basis, from ordering stuff on Amazon to whether the Uber car is going to arrive to whether we're going to get the loan application or whatever it might be, all rely on the patterns that we've created in the past. So when you shop at Amazon and you place a product into the basket and the Amazon algorithm says people who've bought this have also bought this, that's the pattern that they're using. And one of the really interesting bits of research that came out, and if I just flip to this MIT article, was at the beginning of the pandemic, what happened is many of the algorithms that we relied on broke because our patterns had changed. Think about Amazon is a great example, but it's not exclusive to Amazon. So in the past, when we're buying things from Amazon, the way that we optimize the algorithm is very different to the way that we optimize it now under lockdown. So for example, when you were buying something to go to the beach with last year outside of the pandemic, your thoughts would have been the quality of the product, the things that you might want to do. When you're buying stuff on Amazon today, those things are kind of important, but what's much more important is, can I get the thing? Is it in stock? Or will I have to wait 2 weeks for this one, where there's one over here that only cost me a week? So Amazon and all of their algorithms, they took a little bit of time to adjust to basically be re-optimized in a pandemic situation. And that process is going to have to happen again if the algorithms are going to work more effectively for us. Now, look, that's me as a lay person talking to you, trying to help you to understand that context. Let's bring in an expert who really can talk to us about that. So, Christian, I'd really love your perspective, because the company that you set up really, uses data to provide strategic strategic insight for organizations. But before we sort of get into the whole thing about bias and correlation and how the pandemic throws a spanner in some of that, just tell us a bit of your creation story. Tell us about how you got to where you are and what you're doing right now with Tenzo, the company that you run.
Yep, definitely happy to do that. Originally studied computer science and economics back in the day, and then made the obvious choice to go and set up a chain of restaurants. So computer scientist that became a restaurateur, set up a chain of 6 restaurants in London called Hummus Brothers, probably about now 15 years ago. And whilst I was doing that, I was really struggling with the team not being able to make efficient decisions because they weren't being able to get access to the data to make those decisions. So, for example, what we were expecting our GMs to do was to run each restaurant as if it was their own. So they would need to decide the amount of staff, how much food to order in, be aware of like customer complaints, and just motivate the team to achieve good average spends, etc. And typically what would happen, and this really shocked me when I first started out, was how bad the general technology space in the restaurant industry was. I would routinely have to download CSVs with like massive files with lines of data, either transactional data or how much staff we'd put or how much food we'd ordered in, analyze all that, put it into a massive Excel, and then circulate that to the team. And invariably, it wouldn't get engaged with because there was too much data. They weren't data scientists, so looking at Excels was not something that they really wanted to. And opening an Excel on a mobile phone is not exactly a pleasant experience. So they would just not engage with it. And we would overorder, underorder, not have the right amount of staff, and just generally not have a good understanding of the business. And that's where I teamed up with a friend from university called Adam Taylor, who his experience was he joined a mobile gaming studio after university and then ended up at McKinsey doing a lot of big data work for them. And so much more reasonable career path than the one I'd taken, and really bringing like the restaurant experience, our combined computer science experience and his analytics big data experience, we brought that all together. And so what that means today is that we're able to help restaurants like the Fat Duck or Caravan or Nando's predict how much food they will sell in the future and help their teams engage with that data so that they're not over ordering or under ordering, and they're making better decisions on a day-to-day basis.
That's great. And what I love about the narrative there is, and I remember, as you know, I work in hospitality too these days. There was for the longest time, what has technology got to do with hospitality, right? And I think it's been really interesting over the last few years about how much that's changed. So, so much of that, and I love what you're talking about there in terms of using the data to be able to predict, to help optimize business performance. Which I think is really interesting. So let's start with that prediction and talk about, the experience of the behavioural change. So I guess from a Tenzo perspective, did you see this, not so much see this coming, but were you able to witness it happening?
Yes, very much so. Specifically in the forecasting piece, if you want. So what we do to help predict future sales, we take various inputs, if you want, what you'd call features. So, for example, we will take historical sales to help predict future. We will take the weather. We will take events. We will take like traffic information. So all these different sources of data to help us use the past data to predict the future. And generally, that helps you get an accuracy that is 30 to 50% more accurate than what you would typically if you were using a 4-week average, or if typical traditional ways of forecasting, which means that you can have the right number of people and reduce how much wastage, or make sure you have the right amount of chicken on the grill, for example, at the right time. The problem here is that this seemingly magical behavior that these AI algorithms display is just it's a very efficient statistical engine that can help predict outcomes as long as they don't deviate too far from the norm. And here we saw an incredible deviation from the norm, let's say, whereby, and so specifically what was interesting is we saw it, we have customers in Singapore, so we kind of saw it first there, if you want, where suddenly over a period of of a week, we really saw that our forecast was way off. But one thing that was very important for me pre-pandemic, even not, and this was without the pandemic in mind, is really making sure that we would engage the general manager. And to do that, what we would do is actually give them access on their mobile phone to the forecast and told them, hey, this is what you made last week, this is what you made last year, this is the weather next week, this is what we think you're going to make, but you should look at that and change it if you think that it is not correct, because you might know that there's roadworks happening outside your front door that we won't know. And actually, what was interesting is that there was a period of a couple of weeks where the numbers we were generating were way off because it hadn't adjusted effectively, but the GMs were able to make that adjustment, which was
that's interesting. So and so two things there, Christian. How long is the lag? And I'm assuming kind of the same for probably differs on application, but how long do you think the lag? Is it a couple of weeks? Is it a month? Is it longer than that? And then the second question.
There was a week.
Go on.
There was a week where it was completely bonkers.
Right.
It just didn't understand at all what was happening.
Yeah.
And then it started adjusting because it started looking at what happened recently to adjust to that. What was incredible through this, I think, was how the GMs were really able to take that number and stall. And let's be clear, the error was much higher. Even now, 3 months down the line is much higher than what it used to be pre-pandemic, because there's so much noise, and people are changing their patterns of consumption a lot even now, right? It's not very and this is where clearly AI is able to look at these patterns, identify these patterns that humans might not be good at generally, but in a situation where it's everything thrown out of the window, actually humans are much more able to think through or react in the right way to this.
Yeah, change. No, I mean, I love that. And we've often talked, and actually I've argued this the other way around, actually, about the difference between sort of correlation and causality. So an algorithm deals in correlation, so it looks for the frequency of the pattern, if you like. Whereas as humans, we use, we sort of try to think about, well, why is that happening? And in some examples, and I remember there was a hospital example that we had at Microsoft where, through AI, we were able to identify correlation between mental health and complications in cardiovascular surgery. And nobody understood the causality, but it kind of didn't matter because we had trust in the correlation, and that's okay in one scenario. But now we're in a world where actually you kind of need to know, Amazon, you need to know that I can't get any flour anywhere. No, I'm serious, I can't get any flour. So if anybody, you just want to send me bags of white powder, that would be great. No, actually that's a terrible idea. But as a human, I understand that and I can factor that in, but an algorithm we don't. So I love this concept about how you blend sort of human intuition and the mechanics of the algorithm. I think that becomes quite interesting going forward. And also, do you think that this period has sort of destroyed trust in algorithms, or is it simply that okay, this is such a big deal, nobody really could do anything about it?
I think people understand that this is so, we hear the news reports for a long time. Just I would count the number of times they would say the word unprecedented. You just be like, and it was, it was at a point where saying, we get it, it's unprecedented. You don't need to say it again. Yeah. But it is that, right? So, and I think there is a better understanding that how these algorithms work is look at historical data to predict the future. And given this is nothing, we haven't seen anything like this in history before. I was reading somewhere that someone's saying, we should train algorithms for the stock market looking at the 1929 crash, right? Because, looking at really extreme situations, because these happen, not regularly, but to a certain extent. But what we've seen this time, I mean, the last pandemic, the world was a completely different place, right? So there's nothing really that, and I think people get that. I'm sure there was still frustration when you can't get what you wanted to order on Amazon, that you would just expect it to show up the next day. But I think people understand.
So, Dave, I have a question because I'm the odd one out, right? You describe yourself as a layperson, but you're talking about data in a level that I just don't understand. I'm a what was it? I'm a left brain, I think, or whichever way around it is. I mean, I don't even know that.
They weren't the words I used, but we'll take those.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that's why you invited me on. There were words that kind of pricked my attention. And I think, Christian, when you said magic, that like this to me is all just magic. How do you? So it was interesting that you've got your background, but you also partnered up with someone that you were at university with. How do you marry the left brain and right brain part of the business to make that work? And how do you, when you're dealing with managers who presumably are not data scientists or rocket scientists, or they maybe have a similar level of understanding that I do. How do you explain this stuff? Because I've sort of, I'm keeping track of the conversation, but I'm going to forget it once I've left this. And you are talking in a language that most people don't understand.
That's a really good, interesting point, because I have this conversation with our team a lot, because I think there is, you're totally right that, and a restaurant GM is probably like a really interesting case to look at, right? It's not, someone does not typically go into hospitality to look at reams of data and to be stuck in front of a computer or on their phone trying to understand what they should be doing based on the data. Typically it's the love of hospitality. They want to be with the customer. They want to be working with their team and not stuck in front of a computer. And one is that we've really done Tenzo's mobile first, if you want, in terms of like making sure that you can have it on your phone, because I really believe the GM should not be sat in the back room on their computer, but like on their phone, so that they can look at this easily on the go. But I think the more important point is, when you look at the forecasting, we really looked at what was the least amount of information we could give to give trust in the forecast we gave. And I think it's a really interesting point, the word trust here, like how much can we trust these things? But what we found is that if you showed them last week, what the weather was in both of those days, if there's any specific events, for example, Mother's Day or Father's Day or Christmas or whatever it might be, and then what we'd forecast based on that, that was enough for them to be like, okay, I don't really understand all the mechanics behind it, but I trust it now, because I see, okay, it's telling me more than last year, but last year I see the weather wasn't as good, and it wasn't, Mother's Day was the last weekend, etc. But it's constantly a battle for us to really establish more trust in what we're predicting. And also, one important thing we do is whenever we do trainings for these teams, we very much told them, challenge the number, don't accept it. It is more precise than what you would typically be given by your head office that will give you a 4-week average. But you know best. It's your branch. You know best, because you know if there's roadworks, and other events. And also, this gives them ownership of that number. Then they're happy to say, yeah, I'll take that number and I believe in it, as opposed to be like, well, the machine told me this and I don't trust it.
But that's why I think the approach of getting the human and the machine working together is the only way of doing it. And I've seen this, and in fact, Nick, you and I have seen this, time after time. The only way to do this is you have to take the humans on the journey. So they'll be, like you, in terms of it's not my world, or they'll be, and I know lots of roles, lots of managers who'd be like, no algorithm is ever going to know my market, my customer better than I do. Well, there's a part of that that's true, and there's a part of that that's not true. And what you have to do organizationally, and I think this is consistent of any adoption of AI or those kinds of tools, is you've got to take them step by step. And so you start small. And I think, Christian, I know, in your business, you might do a small proportion of the data. I've seen other examples where we'll do 10% will be done by the algorithm, and then if you're happy with that result, then we'll ramp that up, and then we'll get to a point where,
Yeah.
and I've seen this in organizations where you start small, and by the end of it, they're like, seriously, the algorithm's brilliant, and now I'm enjoying doing the bit of the job that it's enabled me to do. But it's so crucial. That's why, and I'm not trying to plug what we're doing here, but I get really frustrated as being in the tech industry by the language we use and the words we use, and how we sort of hide away, the relevance of what we do to other people, and then we expect them to make decisions of it. And it might be decisions about policy, or it might be decisions about business investment. We've got to make it accessible. Christian, you have to make it accessible, otherwise people aren't going to buy into what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I have to be able to get people to understand how big a deal it is, otherwise they're not going to maybe to change the policy stuff that I'd love them to change so we can have a brighter future. So I think this whole thing about, and again, Nick, you taught me this lesson, is the technology's lovely, Dave. What does it enable me to do? How does it actually change what I do? And I think it's that outside in focus that becomes so important for what we're doing. Nick, you also touched on something that made me think that, Christian, again, you've got a really interesting perspective. So, you're running a startup, a tech startup as well, as if that wasn't enough, a tech startup in the hospitality industry. It must be, a roller coaster ride anyway. What have the last 12 weeks even been like for you? How's that been, in terms of running the organization and the team?
Yeah, it's been an interesting time, to say the least. It was. I mean, I was away the week just preceding this, so I came back and the lockdown hadn't happened. But we were coming back from the airport, and I was telling my wife, I think we should go and buy a couple of desks, because I think we'll probably be working from home for some time, but I don't know how long. But you know what? It'll be good to have desks anyway. We can work
couple
from
of desks
home.
And some loo roll, yeah.
Exactly. We'd taken it from the hotel we just left.
Perfect. Good man.
And so our first priority was really just making sure that the team was safe, and we're so lucky that we can work from wherever we want, and I think that made it so much easier for us than a lot of our customers, and I'm sure, Dave, for you with Mitchell and Butlers, I'm sure that must have been a really hard decision, because the government was not saying, hey, you have to shut. It was saying, if you can work from home, but if you can't. And so that was an easy decision for us, really, at the end of the day. So first thing was really make sure everyone could work from home, got them all set up. And we did that probably, I think it was a week, 10 days before the proper shutdown started. And then our second priority, having been a restaurateur before, I was very much like, listen, if these guys have to close, there is no revenue coming in, and they can't afford to pay for anything. Forget like anything, like it's rent, food, whatever it is, you're just not paying anything. So we went out very quickly just saying, if you're closing, we're not charging you. Which actually was well received, and I think
smart move.
Hopefully has brought us some goodwill for. We've really been trying to support them and sharing the burden, really sharing the pain with them in that way. Our third kind of, we were just thinking of our different stakeholders. So once the team was safe, the customers were like, hey, we're here to help you. We won't charge you if you're closed. It was really, our other stakeholders was like our shareholders really just being like, hey, as we're a startup, and we needed to put a plan in place just to say, hey, this is what our strategy is over the next year. We went to all our suppliers and we're just saying, hey, this is what's happened. We're going to need some help from you guys. And we had some incredible, so Amazon Web Services basically gave us pretty much a year's worth of free server credits.
Wow.
Salesforce and HubSpot, reduced their prices for us. So there was some like incredible. It felt like they were sharing that pain too. We were like, hey, this is what we've done for our customers. We're hoping you can do that for us in a way. And there were some good conversations, except with maybe one or two, which honestly I don't think we'll be working with them for very much longer at this place. So that was the initial. The first 4 weeks, the teams were all working. We hadn't furloughed anyone because we had a lot of work in the pipeline, and we just didn't know how long it was going to last. We thought, is this going to be, a couple of weeks, a month? We had no idea. We just really were like, I think like most people, we were just like, we don't know how bad this is going to be. And then at that point, we did furlough some of the team because we realized that pretty much 80% of our customers stopped operating. The ones who continued operating were deliveries or people who are in countries that were hit before and then recovered. So Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, etc. And so really now we've got kind of a core team that's really making sure that we can handle with the customers, and things are coming back and actually feeling very optimistic, and have been really trying to help our customers think through, how do you reopen? What's this 1 meter, 1.5 meter, 2 meter rule? What are you going to need to get in terms of PPE? How do you communicate to your customers? What should you do in click and collect, delivery, etc.? And that's the phase we're at now. And then I think the next phase for us is really to start thinking longer term, strategically. How does the world look different? And clearly, it will be different. And restaurants are going to have to operate differently and innovate. And we're seeing a lot of them do that. And how do we fit into that new world?
And do you have, I guess, any sort of high level advice? And great if it's applies to people outside of the hospitality industry as well, but it doesn't matter if it doesn't. As they're trying to, most organizations are trying to figure out, how to reopen. What is that going to look like? How's that going to change? How do I keep track of that, and so I can continue to evolve? Do you have any advice, I guess, from a data perspective about the things that they should be doing in order to give them the best chance at getting that right?
So I could talk a little bit about hospitality. I'd love to hear you two tell me a little bit outside hospitality what you think.
Sure.
In hospitality, what we're very much advising on is saying, hey, there might be a second wave. There might be another pandemic. There might be other things that disrupt the world, and really not having just one stream of income and eat in only is like, you need to diversify. So you need to be doing deliveries. You need to be doing DIY meal kits at home. And as you do that, an important piece to think about is really around, how do I design my menu? Because they're not sitting in a restaurant where they've got time to flip through the pages and have a look at this. They're going to be looking at it on a small screen. They don't have a waiter to explain to them what's happening. So it needs to be streamlined. It needs to be simpler. It needs to be like convenience effectively.
Yeah.
And so really helping them think through, look at your data. What are your top sellers? Why is that? And choose that to really go on your menu when you're thinking through that. Also, we've been like helping them think about, if you are going to open Eat In, what is it that's important in terms of communicating to the customers, to your team, to make sure everyone feels safe and wants to come into your restaurant. So little things like, I walked by, as we were saying earlier, by McDonald's, that people were wearing their face masks, the staff were wearing their face masks, but Pret, they weren't. And some people will feel like, well, I'm just not sure I want to go into that branch because they're not, as safe as McDonald's is possibly. That's not, I'm just saying some people will feel like that.
No, exactly. I mean, I love what you said, and talk about similarities. I mean, Nick, in our world of the sort of more corporate office world, I think, this whole thing about the customer journey, the employee journey, has to be completely revisited. I mean, Nick, you must see probably a bit more of it than I do these days. Do you think people are even thinking about the employee journey as we go back into the office?
Massively. But I think that at the beginning, we felt like this was going to be a period of lockdown and then we'd go back. I think that about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we realized that it's a period of lockdown and then a very long period of something else that we don't quite know what it is. And if we do, and when we do go back, it would be very different. I think there is a realization that hit a good few weeks ago that, the kind of the cramped offices, the sort of sitting on each other's laps, the bumping into each other, sharing food in the kitchen, and all of that kind of stuff just won't happen for a very long time. We'll have to stagger people. We'll have to do rota systems. We'll have to, we'll get some of it, but it will look very different.
But I was intrigued by the point Christian was making about sort of reorienting the service, and I think if you translate let's translate the restaurant into an office, right? So a restaurant, we're used to the procedure of I go in, I'm greeted, I get taken to my table, I peruse the menu, I order, I get served. Not much different from me. You know, I go to my office, I swipe in, I walk to my desk, I go grab a coffee. There's maybe a communal fruit bowl. I'll go there, I'll sit in a meeting space. Well, actually, both of those things need to be completely rethought in a
Yeah.
no touch environment.
Yeah.
And what I love about, I guess, the example you've given us from hospitality, Christian, is I think it's that whole rethinking about that journey, about what that needs to be, but equally from the complexity. And you kind of touched towards the end of the point, which was for a range of different experiences. So some people will be, let me into the office or let me into the restaurant. I don't care how big the queue. I'm going in. And others will be, you know what? You go first, buddy. I'm going to sit this one out and see how that goes. So I think they're the things. Go on.
So I was going to say, I think also on the office dimension, I think there's something, obviously, I think we're all aware of, but maybe just the scale of it is maybe not apparent yet, is people struggling at home mentally because, like extroverts, for example, wanting to like getting their energy with people around them. And I think some people are really, I was speaking to a customer of ours who was saying, I was not supposed to, but I ended up opening our office in France where the lockdown was even tighter, because I had two people who were just like, I don't care. I'm just going to go. You could stop me. It's worse for me to be at home, actually. Yeah. So I'm going to just go. And in the end, there were three of them that were going into the office and just being careful and everything. But there's that. You're totally right. I think at one end of the spectrum, you've got to have people who are like not worried. They'll just go in. There's ones that are like, I have to go in. And then there's ones that are just going to be like, no way am I going anywhere. And they won't want to get onto the tube for a long time. And so this is going to be, handling those two extremes is going to be very difficult over the next few months.
So I'm going to leave you both. It's a two-part question. The first is to Christian, and based on the answer, Nick, I'm going to throw that over to you. So the okay. First, Christian, is, do you think data can play a big role in making a success of us coming out of lockdown? And assuming your answer is yes, Nick, what will we have to do to maximize the impact of that?
So I would say yes, and I'll give one example again on the restaurant industry. Just quickly, is like the forecasting element of it. I think is going to be even harder because you're not going to have a clear view for the teams working in the restaurants about how much they're going to make. And I think these algorithms can help you predict that future. And again, alongside the human element of it. So having to work like the machine with the human, I think that can help them come out of this and predict the right levels of demand, because it's going to become even more volatile as we come out of this.
So that's a big fat yes, Nick. What we're going to have to do to convince you?
Look, I think Christian touched on it before, which is that everyone's experience is different, and you can probably bucket them into different categories, but there are so many kind of different variations of those experiences as well, and not just historical experiences, but their present and future ones as well, depending on family situations. Do I have young kids or older kids? Depending on whether I've got elderly relatives at home. So for organizations to go some way to understand those experiences will determine whether those employees or customers are going to be convinced that what they're about to do is going to be safe enough. If there's a blanket approach to, well, we've done what we can, it's as safe as it's going to be, we've increased the cleaning, and generally people are going to be fine, you're going to get very extreme reactions. If you respond to the different experiences and show an understanding of those, then people will feel much more comfortable.
Okay. Well, listen, thanks guys for both of that, and thank you both for joining us. Before I leave you this week, I just want to make one final plug. It's tomorrow. I've been working all month on this with the lovely folks at Telium. It's a very similar conversation to the one we've had today, only taking a broader approach to the role that data can play for all of us in understanding and embracing that new normal. And we're still conflicted about whether new normal is a great phrase or a terrible phrase, but kind of we're all where we are. Look, it's tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock. The thing I will say to you is I've spent the last 12 weeks being sent emails about joining webinars and online stuff. And look, I won't just say this because it's me, but they're mostly terrible because it's some slides. I don't even see the people, and people are reading out the slides. We have gone out of our way to not deliver that experience. It's a four-way conversation. We're talking about the impact. We've got people not like me, people who've got proper jobs doing this stuff and doing it for real, for money. We'd love it if you could join us. The URL is on the screen. I'll put it in the thing as well. And with that, it just really leaves me to say thank you again for tuning in. Thank you for being with us on this journey. Show 6, who would believe it? We'll be back with you next week. Until then, stay safe, look after each other, and embrace the bright world of data. All right, see you next week, guys. Thank you.
There are 1,000 stories in the Envisioners' future. This is just one of them.